All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel some ancient texts to reveal that our most foundational human myths, yeah, they were actually just massive administrative cover-ups. We're looking at a heavily redacted, highly argued over collection of texts known as the Antediluvian corpus. And trust me, what it reveals is going to completely change how you view the stories you thought you knew.
Seriously, I want you to ask yourself, what if the divine narratives we all know, the ones that have literally shaped human morality and civilization for thousands of years, are actually just concealing municipal disputes, paperwork errors, and cold, calculated institutional decisions? Like, what if the epic wars of our ancestors weren't fought with swords at all, but, ridiculously enough, with vowel points and verb voices? So let's reframe the very first crime. We've always been told the crime in Eden was a moral failure, right? Eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. But look at the unredacted corpus text. It reveals something entirely different. The original phrase actually translates to the standing to judge a case on one's own authority. So the first crime wasn't about morality at all. It was a sudden jurisdictional dispute. A court had basically been founded outside the palace, and the palace responded exactly as palaces do. To understand this massive cover-up, we're going to march chronologically through human history. We'll look at the archive houses, the jurisdiction of Eden, Abel's dark experiment, the targeted drowning, and finally, the song in the water. Which brings us to Section 1, the rival archive houses.
You see, this whole history is actually a bitter 11,000-year argument conducted by 4 distinct record-keeping households. And spoiler alert, none of them are innocent. First up, you have the Canaan hand, or the Sethites. They're the victors, the ones who smooth over the text so all the glaring gaps just magically disappear. Next is the Bronze hand, the Nodites or Cainites. They're highly technical, absolutely furious, and totally obsessed with correcting the inventory of the world they were evicted from. Then we've got the Quiet hand, the Abelites. They write like clerks filing receipts, but by holding the documents they quietly dictate, well, everything. Finally, the Water hand. This one doesn't even write in ink. It literally sings through water stains and warped vellum in the margins. Literally every story we know is just a heated argument between these 4.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, the jurisdiction of Eden.
Let's head back to the garden and see how all this builds our understanding of the very first orthographic crime that completely altered human destiny. Believe it or not, it all comes down to one silent letter. The father of Cain is named in the absolute oldest texts as Samaul, meaning the voice of God. But a scribe from the house of Seth snuck in a single silent letter, an Aleph, changing the name to Samael, the venom of God. By adding just one silent letter, they literally handed the father of Cain poison, shifting him from a herald to a toxic threat. Think about that for a second. The entire doctrine of original sin hangs on a single, silent clerical error. Crazy, right? And what about the serpent? Well, the original text uses the word Nakashash. So the serpent wasn't actually an animal at all. Nakashash refers to these tired, copper-skinned bronze workers and diviners who arrived at Eden on foot. They came looking for a treaty. You see, they could read the history of any physical substance, but they couldn't assign names to living things. So they offered to trade their divination skills to the people in the garden in exchange for the power to name. Meaning the woman in the garden wasn't deceived by some magical snake. She was literally just being interviewed by an exhausted bronze worker who sat down and asked her 240 questions, just to gauge what she actually knew.
Knowing this drastically changes the nature of their punishment. The expulsion? It wasn't a divine physical banishment. That famous flaming sword turning every way is actually described in the oldest texts not as a weapon, but as a standing legal injunction. It was posted at a boundary specifically to prevent the return and re-argument of a case. So the expulsion was really just the closing of a court. Humanity was served with a legal document that just happened to have a very sharp edge.
All right, Section 3, Abel's dark experiment.
Okay, hold on to your hats, because we're about to take everything you thought you knew about the first murder and turn it completely upside down. We need to reframe this event as a calculated, horrific, municipal ritual. See, Abel wasn't some young, innocent shepherd. Actually, he was a middle-aged man with 14 children and a very dark theory. After 11 years of experiments, Abel deduced that the earth preserves an injustice, but it forgets a gift. Basically, a donation to the ground just washes away, but a wrong stays vocal forever. Abel wanted to become an eternal institution, so he realized that a person delivered into the ground as a victim would become a permanent transaction. They'd be able to hold and wield administrative power from beneath the earth itself.
But to actually pull this off, Abel needed an officiant.
He needed someone willing to take the fall and be remembered as a murderer so the earth would officially register the death as a crime. So he asked his brother, Cain, 7 times by the way, to perform the killing under authority. Finally, Cain agreed, and the chilling instruction Abel gave to Cain right before the act, "Then do it as if you hated me."
This means Cain was never actually cursed. He was essentially given diplomatic immunity. The famous mark of Cain was actually a municipal badge, a 7-fold license carried by a functionary who performed a killing under authority. It was a completely uninterruptible protection to ensure his reputation took the fall, while Abel's vocal grievance was successfully filed in the earth. So the blood crying from the ground? Not a metaphor at all. It was a literal status report signaling that the experiment had worked.
And what happened to Abel's 14 children? Well, they deleted themselves from the record. The Abelites realized that true power doesn't sit on the throne. It sits in the drawer beneath the throne, exactly where the paperwork is kept. By officially not existing, they could secretly arrange the administrative substrate of civilization without ever being targeted. I mean, they invented the sealed file, verified all royal pedigrees, and kept the only continuous demographic record. But most importantly, they held the sole communication line to their ancestor, who has been vocal underground for 6,000 years, keeping the true records of every single human born.
Which leads us right into Section 4, the targeted drowning. Let's dive into the flood. The text reveals that this was absolutely not about divine wrath against violence or sin. The real backstory here is that the Watchers were actually just a bored duty roster of beings who had absolutely no biological functions. No sleeping, no eating, no ending. They eventually deserted their posts to come down to Earth simply because they wanted to be finished bodies. And in exchange, they traded 5 distinct technologies to humanity. We're not talking about magical sins here, but completed body technologies. Cosmetics, which is the right to alter your surface, astronomy for prediction, literacy, which completely ended the monopoly on record-keeping, obstetrics, and contract law, which taught humans how to get out of bindings.
The systemic response to this massive technology transfer was the flood. But this wasn't some random storm. It was a tactically sequenced military strike. Look at Phase 1. The Watchers were bound in the valleys before the water even arrived. They were forced to sit there and watch as the people they taught were destroyed. Then, Phase 2. The water actually erupted from the ground to hit the Sethite highlands first and fastest. And Phase 3, the sea, the mountain peaks, and the deep underground cities were entirely bypassed. The flood was a precision weapon, guys, not a universal reset.
So why target the Sethite highlands specifically? Well, because the Sethites had figured out how to manufacture garments of light in a shed. They were quite literally industrializing divinity and offering the manufacturing process to their neighbors. The deluge was a targeted assassination of a Sethite manufacturing process that was creating luminous bodies. Think about it. A monopoly on power isn't endangered by rebellion, it's endangered by a shared manufacturing process with a documented yield curve. The flood was deployed for one reason, to shut down the factory.
And now for our final section. Section 5, the song in the water. For this last part, we're looking at the breathtaking and honestly haunting legacy that actually survived the flood. To understand it, we first have to totally redefine Lilith. Lilith wasn't a demon at all. Lilith was a title. It was an office seat, meaning the one who does not lie beneath. And the corpus notes it was held in succession by at least 29 different women. The 11th occupant of this seat was a woman named Naama, and she formalized an absolutely incredible defensive archive just before the flood hit.
Before the water comes, you need to deeply understand the city of Enoch, which was built by Cain. Enoch was a phoneme grid. They literally assigned sounds to street intersections, meaning the physical route you took from the city gate to your door became a pronounceable word. Your physical address was, quite literally, your name. To walk to someone was to slowly pronounce them. Moving houses meant entirely changing your identity. The city itself was designed as a massive singing memory storage device.
But here's the catch. The official city registers absolutely refused to give addresses to the Nephilim, the children of the Watchers. So, Naama, using the musical calibration techniques of her people, built a second archive. When no institution would record these children, Naama stepped up and taught 900 marginalized women on the coast to sing the list in a continuous, unbreakable rotation. It's brilliant when you think about it. A sung genealogy cannot be confiscated, and it cannot be edited without killing every single woman who knows it. When the targeted flood came, it hit the coast early on. But those women, they didn't run. They just kept singing. And because they never stopped singing, even as the water took them, the song transferred.
The surviving descendants in Lind, who had been trained in this continuous song since childhood, knew they couldn't safely sing the real names anymore. So they hid the names but kept the metric shape, singing nonsense words to the exact same tune. Which means, and I really want you to let this sink in, every modern lullaby we sing to soothe our children to sleep is actually a redacted genealogy. It's a list of the disappeared from a drowned world.
This history forces us to look completely differently at the stories that prop up our entire civilization. So I want to leave you with this final thought. How much of our accepted history is actually just a peace treaty written by the victor to hide their own administrative crimes? Next time you are told a people were wicked, ask yourself what the man who told you was holding at the time. Really think about that and keep asking questions.